Well, this all started several years ago for me. I was a traditional private client lawyer working with very wealthy clients and really taking orders from the patriarch. In all but one cases, it was a patriarch. Until one day I got a headhunter call saying they were looking for someone to give advice to an 80-year-old billionaire who wanted to do some planning. At that time, I was really getting bored with my traditional law practice. So I applied for the position. I won it, and it changed my whole approach to everything. And I'll be explaining why. So I thought I knew everything when I started working for him. But the first day I had lunch with him, before I sat down, I remember he said to me in a very grouchy way, he said, "Did you know that only 6 of 100 family businesses make it to the third generation?" It was a great way to start. So I said, yes, I knew that. So let's get to work. And I worked with him for 4 years full time. His charge to me was to make sure that his family business empire would last under family control for 300 years. That's what I was supposed to achieve for him. At the same time, the head of his legal department took me aside and said, "I'll tell you the real goal that you have. That is to keep the family fights off the front page of the newspaper." So I like this slide with the quote from back in the 16th century because I use it a lot. There's little less trouble in governing a family than a whole kingdom. So today I want to talk about what I've learned over the years from working with families. And as Philippe just said, and thank you for all the nice comments, but Philippe just said that it's up to the process. And that is so true. To put it in a very succinct form, you could say that I started out as a product provider. I had solutions, I had trust, I had shareholder agreements. I didn't spend too long trying to understand the family. 180 degrees later, now I don't have the answers, I don't have the products, but I do know that there is a way of working with any family in a process manner that can lead that family to their own solutions. So I could title this talk "What I Have Learned" instead of "Justice and Fairness in Families," but I'm really interested in helping families feel that they are treated within their family with a sense of justice and fairness. And I think that makes all the difference. And I also will add as a preface that I don't think this process approach is specific to any particular culture or country. I've worked with a number of different countries, and at first I wondered if I was just promoting US democracy, but it turned out that every family I worked with could make a lot of progress by following these process rules, which I will be going over. So I want to make this a take home that you can go right back and apply, and it will be very practical. But I do have a philosophy background, so I'm always interested in the ideas. And these are the ideas for today. I want to talk about the rule of law. And as much as we're all hearing about the rule of law lately, it's not a very easy idea. You'll find out if you push that most people can't get past the idea of the law applies to everyone, which is part of it. And within a family, I mentioned quickly, it's really important for them to feel that they're in a system that provides justice. And there's a wonderful philosopher, John Rawls, Rawls, who writes about justice being fairness. So I keep fairness in my title of this too. And it's such a rooted concept. You can look at little children playing and starting to argue, and one of them might say, but that's not fair. That idea of fairness is so basic to any culture, in my opinion. So from justice, I moved to family decision making. And I've done a lot of work in family governance. I even wrote a book, International Family Governance, which is here. And some people in the field just got tired of the word governance. They kept saying it's too fancy. What does it mean? So I've translated it most of the time now as governance is only family decision making. Any group that has a reason to make decisions together is working on governance issues. It's not that abstract an idea, it's an everyday concept. But what's different and what I'm excited about talking to you today is, can you apply the rule of law to family decision making? You'll see, or you might already know, that a lot of my approach for a number of years has been to look at what's going on in a country or on a country level and see what there is that you could apply just as well to a family group. And I think you'll find a lot, but what I didn't find anyone talking about is, can you apply the rule of law, which is always discussed on a country level, to a family group? And how would you do it? And why would you do it? So I'm delighted that Aditya invited me to speak. As he said, I'm very pleased to help support any projects that he is coordinating in India. And I hope next year we'll all be there in person. So I'll start out with what you do not want to do, what you need to avoid. So here is a family case to avoid. The patriarch is in charge, rules the family, makes all decisions, doesn't explain why he makes the decisions, often changes his mind, and he doesn't care or listen to the rest of the family. This is a setup for disaster. To make it very practical, I'll talk about, with changed facts a bit, one of the first so-called family governance family cases that made a huge impact on me and took me a long time to understand what led to it. But here's what happened. There was a very successful entrepreneur, founder of a very big business, and he had one son and two daughters. The one son was active in the business. The two daughters were not. He decided in his estate planning that the logical decision was to leave all of the voting stock and the control of his company empire to his son, who worked in the business. And to the two daughters, he would leave an interest in the company, but it was non-voting stock. So they had no control, no power. Okay, so what do you think happened over the years? The business kept expanding. The son did a very good job. He took the new profits, reinvested them in the business, and the business continued to grow. How much do you think the daughters ever received in dividends? Nothing. So the years go by, and sooner or later, it had to happen. The daughters met a litigator, happened to be a partner of mine at the time. This is how I got involved. But the litigator had a specialty in fiduciary obligations to minority shareholders. These two sisters were clearly minority shareholders of the big business. And the fiduciary, it's like a trustee, means that the one in charge with majority shares had an obligation of fairness. You like that coming into this picture again? So an obligation to be fair and just to minority shareholders, since they didn't have any control. So what happened when they met the litigator? Didn't take the litigator long to figure out he had a nice, juicy case coming. So he filed a case. They went to court. It took quite a while. It was very complicated. There were a lot of branches of the business. But I think you've all seen cases where the family business is even large enough to disturb some of the country level issues. Anyway, back to this one. So the daughters won their court case, and the brother was obligated to pay them so much in value, which he did not have. So the company had to declare bankruptcy and went out of business. Now, I say badly damaged family relations. That's an understatement. The reason this case is one I will never forget is that years later, when one of the sisters died, the brother did not come to the funeral. It just gives me chills every time I say that. So what I'm interested in having you do as I go through some of these more abstract, less abstract ideas is think about how you could redo that particular case. What could you do to have a different outcome? I learned, again, through working with families, how to change outcomes like that. But this, in my experience, has been a very, very typical example. And just hop up to the country level, when you have this kind of setup, it's more than badly damaged family relations. It can lead to actual revolution. A topic for another day. But what I found is that these conflicts and jealousies and envy are part of the human condition. It doesn't vary much depending on which culture the family is in. There's a whole book called Envy by a German author saying that all decisions can be explained by the basic core of envy. Very interesting book. So I ran into a lot of cases with the patriarch making all the decisions, the family not being happy but couldn't say anything. Finally, the patriarch would pass away and the lid came off the pot and they were all ready to sue each other and did. So it's very sad, proverb, but I thought it was a very short, accurate description from the Chinese proverb, parents in heaven, children in court. And what we want to do is avoid that. It's a bad result. So let me mention a different case, a family I worked with for 3 years, very sharp family, caught on quickly, took advice quickly, and we kept stressing with all of them 3 features: transparency, accountability, and participation, which I'll mention again. And the family ended up feeling that how they had decided to make decisions was a fair one. Remember the principle of fairness and justice? And they agreed that they'll follow the rules they were going to come up with. And the rules included a method to resolve conflicts. So they created their own system. They felt it was fair. They could plan their lives with predictability. And they were a happy family. And that was a wonderful result. So going back to the rule of law, I said it's very difficult to explain all the meanings of the rule of law, but I think it's worth it because what I have seen in the field of family governance is an ad hoc menu of tools. Should we have this? Should we have a family mission statement? Should we have family constitution? It's kind of a menu that people, the advisors, gravitate to one or the other of the tools they like, but I haven't seen an explanation of how it's important to have the surrounding framework. You could say sometimes a legal framework. So a few slides on the rule of law, which is what I've been thinking about so much lately. There's a whole book that I like on the rule of law. I'll hold it up here, and I mention it in the bottom of the slide. He says there are 3 meanings of the rule of law. I'll try to explain each one. And then when I do, think about, do these apply to families or not? I think they have to. If there's a governance rule that applies on a country level, it has to apply on a family level just the same. It's a group, another group. So the first meaning of the rule of law is that government is restricted by laws. I'll mention what that means. I did refer quickly to how important it is in justice and fairness to have laws be predictable. And then last, the one that's used more often is it means a rule of law, not by man, whatever that means. Okay. So number 1, the government is restricted by laws. That means the government must abide by laws. And if the laws are going to change, the government even has to follow certain rules about changing those laws. And the most important part of this first meeting of the rule of law is individual rights cannot be infringed upon. Now that's a big, big topic. And what are the individual rights? You can look at a lot of the work by the United Nations and covenants and the rights of man and think about what are the basic human rights that no one ruling the family or ruling the government should be able to infringe upon. Second meaning of the rule of law is that there is a legal, predictable framework. It's possible to know what the laws are. They are public. They're fair because similar cases are treated in a similar manner. And the law is reliable and predictable, not chaotic or arbitrary. So people can plan their lives. This is a parallel back to accountability in a family. If a family member makes a promise, are they accountable to follow through with that? And isn't that the same as having a rule of law that means it's predictable? The third meaning is one that's used the most, I think, in popular newspaper articles and news programs. It means everyone is subject to the law. No one is above the law. We have seen a lot of that lately. No extra comment on that. That goes way, way back to Aristotle's idea that human is full of passion, which is arbitrary and chaotic. And law is part of the mental mind, thinking, reason. So it's very important. And again, this goes to fairness, to have a rule by general laws, not individual, personal, arbitrary decisions. Okay, so that was our aside on the rule of law. We'll have a quiz on it later, the three meanings of the rule of law. Now let's look at justice, which is also fairness. And what are the principles in decision-making that lead to fairness or justice? And I zero in on three. Now, the first two are taken, and I agree with how they're written and developed, from the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is a big body of the developed countries. And I double checked, but that means that from the beginning, India was not included because it was a developing country. And I guess there's some controversy out there now whether it is developed enough. It should be a member of the OECD, and they've had a relationship to work together since 1995. So keep an eye on how that goes. But the reason it's important is the OECD has done what I think is the best work in the world on what is good corporate governance. Now, up until now, I've been talking about comparing country governance to family governance. But it's also true, there's a mid-level between country at the top, family at the bottom for smaller. In the middle are the large corporations, which are very important elements of society. So the OECD has done a lot of work on good corporate governance. It's all available online. I recommend it highly. If you want to focus families on general fair ideas and not their particular family, it can be very helpful to distribute copies of the two principles from the OECD that are listed here first. Those are transparency and accountability. You'll see them explained in great detail in the OECD Principles of Corporate Governance. And I think they are fantastic, and it's something every family should try to follow. The one I add is participation. I think in a family setting, it's great to have transparency and accountability, but you have to have participation by the family members. Philippe referred to that in his remarks, and I'll just second that it's the family who makes the decision about what kind of governance to have. Each family's different. They need to participate in creating what works for them. Let's go through the three kind of quickly. I'll give two examples. The first is transparency, which means that accurate information is shared to everyone who should know it. Because if you don't share accurate information, what you foster is suspicion and secrets, and those end up causing more family conflicts than any other one I could imagine. So I wanted to remember to give a very touching example of a complicated multi-generational family. And because of the one-on-one private interviews, which I think are essential to developing this family governance process, I found out that particularly some of the wives felt hostile toward some of the other wives. And it was because they each felt the other husband was treated unfairly. In one case of being treated unfairly, it was because that husband spent more of the time on the family's very large yacht, to the exclusion of the other husbands who worked in the office in a more tedious job. So the wife whose husband worked in the office felt it was obvious that her husband was treated unfairly. And then again, of course, envy goes back to that. But what I figured out was they had never gotten the information about how the business worked, where the clients and money came from, how the business developed. When they got the shared information, they understood that the husband who was out on the yacht all the time was the one responsible for bringing in the business, and that without his work, and it was work, even though it looked more like pleasure, but without his work, they wouldn't have any business to work on in the offices. It helped the wives understand each other. It helped them start opening up and all agreeing to work together on developing their own particular, unique governance system. Then another case, a little different, but with a patriarch, one of my favorite prototypes, was in the Gulf region. I had been working for a couple of years with a patriarch who was very, very broad-minded. Obviously, if he was working with me, that made him broad-minded to start out with, but he was smart and current and definitely wanted to do best practices for his family, cared very much about his family. So one of the things we worked on was I could call it a safety net trust. It was to take some share of his accumulated wealth, set it aside. A trust was the vehicle that worked best for this, for the possibility that in the future, some family member might have a need that wasn't anticipated, and this fund would be there for them. It was a very generous, caring plan he had in mind. The thing was, he wasn't going to explain it to the family. In fact, he said he liked those cartoons of the will being read, and it would be a total surprise to all the family members. Well, I tried talking him out of that approach for quite a while. And finally, I thought I had done it, that I had persuaded him that it's better to share information with the family while he was alive and could explain it all. So he organized a meeting of the full family, several generations, a very large meeting room in the house. I walked over there with him. We came in to the living room, and all of the family members were spread out on nice seating all the way around the outside of the room in a big circle. And there was a head chair for him, obviously, and across from it was a nice seat. So I was ready, and instead he said to me just before we started, he said, "I'm not sure I want to tell them anything." Okay, so there we are, whole family there. I've been called as a meeting. There I am. What am I supposed to do? Well, when stuck, often in other countries, I pull out pictures of my children, this time grandchildren, try to talk about travel, some safe topic. I was starting to run out of ideas, and he looked at me from straight across the room. I'll never forget it. He said, "Barbara, why don't you tell them?" I had to double check, what is he talking about? I said, "Tell them." And he said, "About the trust." I was so relieved, and it worked out just beautifully. They were thrilled to hear how he was taking care of them. He was thrilled to be thanked. I mean, it just was a winner all the way around for transparency. So accountability is the second really important governance meeting, which again, I referred to the OECD. It's done wonderful work. And it goes back to childhood. But you promised me. Keeping your promise is a bedrock of human nature, kindness, predictability in the family situation. And where I've seen sad cases of accountability, when I think about it, have been often the situation where a patriarch promises to be stepping down and yet never actually does. And that makes it very difficult, as all of you probably know, for the next generation to figure out what role it has. So in the patriarch setting, also with the patriarch keeping control over everything, I worked with one family where the next generation did not have control over any assets. It made it very difficult for them to plan their futures. And they were pleased to tell me before one of the meetings that their father had finally made very large gifts to each of them. I thought that was just wonderful. These young adults could start planning their lives. And then the family member explained to me that as soon as the patriarch gave them each a very large gift, the patriarch also volunteered to manage it for them. So he took it right back with their name on it. So that didn't work. Another one I saw, the patriarch had promised to step down. He did empty his corporate office, but later he wanted to show me his home office. His home office was a total central command center with video screens watching every part of the company. And at that time, fax machines, so he could countermand many of the descriptions. So those two, I think, are not so hard to understand, the transparency and the accountability, keeping your promise. But as I said earlier, to me, in a family setting, you've got to have participation. And in applying the rule of law, the family members must buy in to that. It's back on a country level again, it's an example of the law can't be just unless it has the consent of the governed. So back to democracy ideas, consent of the governed. A simple case of participation, because I've run into this very often, is whoever's telling me about the family dynamics before I get started working with them will often say, and then we have John. He's the black sheep of the family. He won't be interested and he won't be participating. Well, I've gone out of my way so many times on behalf of the black sheep of the family. I think no one should be labeled that, and it does no good. So what I did in one case was practice treating the black sheep of the family like a regular participant. I called him by his formal name. I called on him as we went around the table. I made everyone listen to him as they did to each other. And at one point, I remember on flip charts, when he had a comment, I would write it on the flip chart so everyone could see that he had a contribution. This all made a difference to him. He started coming to all the meetings, coming on time, doing the homework, and contributing very well to the family discussions. No more black sheep. A different example was one that always makes me laugh, and that is, it was a Gulf family where the oldest son, by tradition, was the one who made all the decisions about everything. There were a number of younger brothers and a number of sisters, but the older son was totally in charge. I worked with this family for several years. Along the way, we built in ideas of accountability and participation, and everyone was encouraged to participate in their views as we went through their agendas. And the funny part is that when the oldest son was participating in a closed-door family business program, someone asked him what it was like to work with an outside governance consultant advisor. I knew who they were talking about. And he said to his cohorts, I love the way he began, said, "Before Barbara came, I was very happy. I didn't know what was going to happen next. I thought all of my business development was finished. I would have no more work to do." But then he went on and he said, "Before Barbara came, I made all the decisions, and I was very happy doing that. But after Barbara came, I started hearing opinions from my brothers and sisters, and they were interesting opinions. Sometimes there were points of view I hadn't thought about. I learned a lot, and we're making better decisions. So now, after Barbara, I am very happy." And I thought I should just quit there, package that, carry it around. So now I'm going to switch again to a high level. I just can't avoid it when I'm working on this. But there's an international group that tracks countries by how well they follow the rule of law. It's online World Justice Project, fascinating project. And the ranking of the top this year, last 2020, Denmark, Norway, and Finland. And they have some articles about why do you think that's happening? Because it's despite the weather. Anyway. So there is I looked up, let me go back. No, I'll just tell you. I looked up on the World Justice Project, United States 21, UK 13, and India 69. Okay, now we're back to being happy. I run into this a lot because happy sounds frivolous. I spent a lot of time in Zurich in particular. They seem to have a hard time with the pursuit of happiness. So I'm always going out of my way to endorse and support how important happiness is. I liked this quote from Scotland. Scots aren't known for being carefree, gay, and happy. And he, of course, called it a duty. So that makes more sense. There's a duty to be happy. And again, there is an international organization that tracks countries and ranks them every year by how happy their citizens are. Once again, the most recent one, the top, Finland, Denmark, and Norway. And some of the articles on their website give an explanation of why those countries keep coming out near the top. And the two main reasons I thought were very easy to understand are freedom, a sense of freedom they had, and a feeling that they participated in the government, which is fascinating. Now, I went ahead for today and looked up rankings. UK is number 13 in happiness, US number 18 in happiness, and India number 144. And the very bottom is 153. So there's some work to be done and happiness to be thought about. Okay. Then I might as well mention for that, this morning when I first turned on my computer, the first email is a webinar, And if you want me to, I'll send it to you and you can have it to look at. But it's called The Happiness Equation, Positive Psychology and Its Impact on Financial Decision Making. It's a webinar by someone I think does a very good job, and it's Wednesday, February 3rd. So I thought that was very timely for my topic. Now, on a granular, very practical level, it's really important to focus on family meetings. The family is the group that makes decisions, that forms its governance, that gives it a sense of fairness and justice and avoids conflict, et cetera, et cetera. So why are they making joint decisions? It varies. Sometimes it's because of jointly owned assets. Sometimes it's also joint goals. And John Ward, the professor in Chicago, who's done a lot with family businesses, said the difference between family businesses that survived well and those that did not. The first study he did, there were two reasons. The survivors had a good independent board of directors. The second factor was that they had regular family meetings. A few years later, he did the same kind of study, and he found that out of those two factors, one of them was more important. Which one was more important? It was the group that had family meetings. And I remember he said to me, Barbara, it doesn't matter what they talk about. The fact is they meet, they agree on a way to make decisions. There are usually procedural rules that are really important. It can be tough. These are going to be agenda items that they have avoided talking about. I've tried a lot of different tools to help those discussions go better. I tell them this isn't family therapy. We're looking at issues that could end up hurting the success of the business or the extended family. We want to focus on that. Another tool I found was try for each person to start their sentences with the word I. I did this, I feel that, I think that, instead of he did this, she did that. Those don't go over well. Another basic I've found a little different from what Philippe was saying is in some cases I've encouraged families not to bring up a lot of old issues. One case, decisions had to be made pretty soon. I said, don't have time for going over the past. What do you want to do going forward? So the individual interviews are critical. I don't think you can do a good job of helping a family with their governance without having individual interviews. I put at the bottom here an example. There was one patriarch who got in touch with me and wanted to hire me to do a family constitution. And he said to me, it shouldn't take you very long because in our family, we have no issues. Well, if so, that would be the first one I ever found anywhere. So they did have issues. And with the interviews, I uncovered 7 pages of notes I could send back about all the issues I heard about and which ones were the most important and which ones needed discussion. So the agenda needs to be distributed ahead of time, needs to be a formal concept, and who will vote and who will attend. Those are very sticky issues for many families. And what I have found that works is to ask them to come up with the answer. I'm not going to say who should attend. I want them to decide, and their discussion will be another part of practicing good family governance. So another thing I've learned when you start facilitating the family meeting, and as Philippe said, it's not for a family member to do, it's an outside person, is to ask what's on their mind and what they want to accomplish at this meeting. It kind of sets the tone that this is their meeting. It's not coming to hear an expert. So the example I wanted to give is it's going to go slowly. Most families are amazed how slowly it goes, but it's valuable to go slowly because they are practicing family governance as they go through these agenda items. I remember one circulation of the agenda items started the meeting, and one of the senior family members said, okay, let's go through 8 of these today. Well, it was a late evening meeting. It was dinner. It was after dinner. They'd gone through 1/2 of one. And as he said, I can see what you mean. These are not easy. There are a lot of process rules that encourage a good, productive meeting, which I've listed there. Now we've got to end with, what does this have to do with applying the rule of law in families? Well, once you do apply the rule of law and all 3 meanings, and then think about our bad case where the sisters did not come, the brother did not come to the sister's funeral. How could that have been done differently? It could have been done differently. I'll let you answer it or think about it. By transparency, accountability, participation. I could imagine for a redo that the patriarch founder of the big business could have called all 3 children together and talk to them about what he was thinking for how the business would be run, give each of the adult children the opportunity to talk through how that would work, come up with compromises, brainstorm, and at the end of the day, it would be their decision. There would not be hard feelings. So I'm going to end again with happiness, which now in the literature is called subjective well-being. Sounds much more proper than happiness. But I like this quote of tying happiness with the rule of law and government. So it's the US President Thomas Jefferson who said the care of human life and happiness is the first and only object of good governance. And I think it's time for me to quit. So I thank you all, and I'll take questions.
Yeah, audience, do we have any quick questions for Barbara? There's a question on what about those Nordic country communities agreement with those governance ratings? I'm not sure what this is referring to, Barbara.
I'm not sure I understand the question. Will you try again?
So I'll request, actually the name is not showing who's asked this question. So I'll request you to, kind of elaborate on this. Okay. Do you have any more questions?
If it's about why the Nordic countries are doing so well with happiness and rule of law, some of it seems to be due to the social services provided by the government, and a lot of it seems due to trust in the institutions in society, which leads to a trust of each other. Now, some argue that they have an unfair advantage. They're very small, they're very close to each other, they're very similar in culture, less prone for conflict. And that, I think, is a fair comment. But they also are taking good care of their citizens, and the citizens know that. So it's interesting, worth reading more in the project online.
Right. So guys, I think it's time for us to wind up. Any questions? Please quickly ask. Okay, there's a question from Samir here. How should the third generation family member intervene in a quarrel between the second generation family members, especially when your assets are mostly inherited by the second generation and they're still in the joint names of the second generation family members?
Well, I'll look at that word intervene. That's a tricky word, and it is not likely to be successful if it's thought of as intervening in some other system. It may sound slow, but I think the best would be if there is a way of gathering everyone around the table, everyone in the same room, and figuring out how to bring up those subjects in a calm, respectful way so that everyone can start to participate in what should happen next, how should it work. It's only going to last well if it comes from all of the participants. That's my advice.
Great. So there's a question from Nitin here. Besides people skills and number skills, what are the key qualities for a family office advisor?
I think the best advice for advisor is a lot of listening. You just don't see it. It sounds so easy, but it's the natural response seems to be talking, delivering solutions, delivering products without stopping to really understand what is going on in the family. It's slow work, but there's no other way to do it. So listening with respect and interest, that's the key.
Sure. We'll take this as a last question from Ramu. How to handle situations where any younger generation family member is not agreeing to any decisions made by the family office advisor and would resist on things laid down by the advisor?
Well, that reminds me of a couple of cases where the younger generation did feel unincluded, and part of the solution was to bring them together as a group with the advisor. So a separate meeting of just the young generation. Again, the advisor role is to listen, 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 try to understand the concerns and what's going on. I had a number of cases where I was the go-between between the senior advisor and the senior generation and the young generation. And all I did was listen to each one, carry the message to the other group, carry the response back to the first group. It didn't sound difficult, but it was a tricky diplomatic approach that worked. They found a way to end up talking to each other and working out decisions that they all participated in. And it actually worked really, really well.